Okay, welcome everyone to today's Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangouts. Today, we're actually in an office with a bunch of people hanging out, a bunch of fantastic SEOs who dropped by in Mountain View to join us live, and a handful of you also online, which is probably because the time is so different than all of the usual Hangouts, so everyone is confused, but that's fine. I'm John Mueller. I'm a Webmaster Trends Analyst at Google in Switzerland. And I don't know if any of you want to introduce yourself. Should we do a quick round? Or, I mean, no pressure.
All right, my name is Dan Jahant. I'm an independent SEO consultant and work out of Menlo Park, California.
My name is Josh Rubin. I own a digital firm in Sacramento, California.
Hey guys, my name is Aldrich. I work in Google doing search outreach for Indonesia.
My name is Martin Schmidt. I am a Webmasters Trends Analyst on John's team, and I usually work out of the Zurich office, but I'm here for a bunch of events, including Chrome Dev Summit in a few weeks. So 1 week. Oh, 1 week's time.
Ready?
I'm done here.
My name is Martin MacDonald, long-time SEO, former SEO for various travel companies like Expedia, Orbitz, prior to that agency role at Omnicom, and now an independent consultant as well.
Hey guys, Sean O'Keefe. I'm here at Google. I work as a data scientist in the ads marketing department.
Joel Cronrod. I'm an SEO at Adobe. SEO is so site search, so search related stuff.
I'm Julia. I had SEO at a small business insurance broker company in Shurion, the kayak of small business insurance. Formerly with Adobe, spent there 5 years, but recently changed to the new company.
Cool. Awesome. Do you two want to introduce yourselves, or you prefer to stay?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Moore, and I'm a web publisher and programmer. It's called meds.com.
And I'm a senior manager of digital solutions in Canada.
Cool. All right. So Martin and Aldrich have to run off soon, but there are people for JavaScript questions. If any of you have JavaScript questions, feel free to throw them at Martin now.
He's the man.
Well,
Not that hard.
Yeah.
my dev team just recently asked me, they are redesigning our mega manual global nav, whatever you call it, and they were asking how much of it would it be possible to do client side, or would it be best for SEO to have a different approach?
So generally speaking, using client-side rendering is not an issue. The only thing that you might find is if you have content that changes really fast, in the sense of like if you have a high change frequency, or your site is really large, or both, then that might lead to delays in getting that indexed and updated. So if a little bit of a lag is fine, then you should be fine. If not, then you might want to have a look at dynamic rendering. Also, we have documentation on that basically went live, I think, 3 weeks ago. So it's relatively new documentation. John presented it at I/O. Now we have documentation available on it as well. You should also never forget that client-side rendering can come with a user experience issue, or can come at a cost for your users, especially if you look at mobile users and networks that are not as stable and fast. So SEO-wise, you're fine, but definitely do very thorough testing on how the user experience looks like and how well it works if things are breaking. What they might want to consider is if they want to use so it depends on what the reason is for doing that. If you say, oh, we have a bunch of infrastructure in place to do client-side stuff, and we want to use this in this part of our site as well, that's a good reason. But then you might want to have a look at hybrid rendering or server-side rendering, because you can use the same technology, but not entirely rendered on the client side, which brings you into a nice position, because that means that crawlers that do not support JavaScript can use it, and users get the content faster, which is something that you generally always want.
Yeah,
More content faster to the user. So JavaScript can get in the way of that, and that might be a challenge or an issue. SEO-wise, especially for Google, you're mostly fine. For other crawlers, you might see
Like Bing
issues.
wouldn't.
Bing, I think right now is one of them that doesn't execute JavaScript as far as I'm aware. They're not really very public about it as far as I can tell. But one that is absolutely public about it is Facebook and Twitter. If you want to use like open graph tags or something like that, that does not work if it's client-side rendered. They do not execute JavaScript. So if you're relying on open graph markup or these nice little cards that appear when you post a link to Twitter, that content has to be server-side rendered or dynamically rendered. That's another possibility.
Thank you.
All right.
Other JavaScript questions?
I have a good JavaScript question. So we use Adobe Target to do testing, and we have M boxes. And I don't think we ever had issues with that, but you know which parts of the testing scripts to ignore, right? So that we never run into the flags
I believe it's
that
disallowed
spammy
on
flag.
the target side. On the target.
Oh, they are
side.
disallowed.
Mhm.
Okay.
They're disallowed.
Okay. Cool. She knows better. Okay.
Thank you.
Fixed.
But if it was open, then they would probably.
Yeah. I think if it's a JavaScript type redirect and we can call it, then it's a redirect.
Yeah.
But if it's blocked, then we don't do anything with it.
Yeah.
I had issues years ago, so not currently, where we had relative URLs in JavaScript on pages at Adobe actually, and Google tried to crawl it and throw 404 because it couldn't figure out the path. So you can definitely open JavaScript and it could be
no, that
tricky.
should not be a problem. If it's a redirect, then we just use it as such.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks.
There's a question here that was submitted. Also, dynamic rendering. They have an e-commerce site, and the products are changing rapidly, and they're lazy loaded with JavaScript scrolling events.
Oh.
So what about lazy loaded scrolling stuff, Martin?
That's fantastic timing. I love how well people. I kind of feel like some people might know things that we haven't put out yet. So we are working on better guidance for lazy loading. We're not having the documents ready yet, but we want to publish these as soon as possible. So latest at Chrome Dev Summit, there will be more guidance on lazy loading. But generally speaking, just make sure and test really, really carefully that if your content becomes visible in the viewport, it should be fine. So relying on scroll events alone is not a good strategy for two reasons. Scroll events are three reasons. Scroll events are really expensive is one reason. The second reason why scroll events might not be sufficient is that people on desktop might just resize their window. That does not trigger scroll events. So if I have like a tiny window, and a lot of people keep forgetting that, but there's a bunch of people who watch soap operas while they're working, and then they have only half of the screen in their browser, or like top half or whatever, and then they might resize the window. That does not trigger scroll events, but that does trigger resize events. So if you're only relying on scroll events, you're missing out on these moments when content should become visible but doesn't. So if the solution is only using scroll events, that's not a good solution. Third and last important piece is, what was the other thing about scroll events? Oh, we are not doing it. We're not scrolling. We're doing something slightly different. But basically, the browser will know that things are becoming visible. And if they are visible, you should load the content that you have hidden behind lazy loading. There's a bunch of ways of doing that. One way of doing it is making sure that your library works well with fetch and render. Another possibility of doing that is making sure that you're using something like Intersection Observer. Intersection Observer is specifically designed to be efficient and working with like these kind of scenarios. Or you can always, if possible, you can always try to like have links to the content or the content itself in NoScript tags. That works as well. That should also then show up. But more detailed guidance coming up.
So if the stuff is changing quickly, should they just implement the JavaScript correctly, or should they dynamic render?
So if stuff changes frequently, as they said, then I would say dynamic rendering is the right workaround right now. And again, you might consider general user experience there. It's not just an SEO thing. It is, you want to make sure that the users get the content as quickly as possible. So dynamic rendering or hybrid rendering or server-side rendering are solutions that I would look into.
Cool. All right. Any other JavaScript questions from you all?
I've got a couple.
Oh my gosh.
So the first one isn't really a specific question. It's kind of a googly question that comes from the world champion of SEO of 2017, Mr. Tom Anthony. Do Google, now obviously you can't comment on your future plans, but I would be very interested to find out if this is the kind of thing that you can conceive might be useful. Would you conceive that it might be useful in that case for us webmasters to have some form of directive, like a robots.txt edition, or the ability to place data in meta tags or a sitemap telling Google explicitly not to bother rendering JavaScript on a specific page, section of a page, section of a site, whatever it may be, simply because it's not involved in the rendering and contents of the page. Therefore, we have no interest in you guys necessarily crawling everything and expending both of our processor cycles.
So I don't know is the short answer. The slightly longer answer to that question is there's a bunch of heuristics already in place, and the rendering generally is like a really interesting and involved process. I literally today saw a diagram that I'm still processing. It is quite a bunch of stuff happening there, and it's really hard. It might sound counterintuitive, but it would cause more complexity to not execute JavaScript sometimes. So I don't think that's going to happen, or that's necessarily something that we're looking into, because of the way that the web's moving right now and the direction that the web is moving into. And also, it's not necessarily about JavaScript that makes rendering expensive. JavaScript can definitely contribute a lot to the cost, but does not necessarily contribute all the costs. And if your stuff works great for users, it will work great for rendering, hopefully, as well. And the bigger issue comes from the fact that there's a gap between what modern browsers do and what Googlebot does right now. We're working on closing this gap sustainably. So it's not a catch-up game right now. It's going to be, we're taking longer to make sure that in the longer run, we are more up to speed. And that's going to give us a bunch of improvements in terms of performance and rendering cost as well. Generally speaking, you don't have to worry about these kind of things. That's our job, and we're trying our best to make it happen. It's very nice if people want to spare us computing cycles, but it will actually add to more overhead and complexity right now. So the way that it's structured, it wouldn't buy us much.
Fair enough. Thank you for the great answer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a follow-up question, if I may.
Ooh, yeah.
Which is actually originates from Cindy Crum of Mobile Moxie, which is, there was old advice regarding, so this is at the intersection between page speed and rendering of content. So in the old advice was to have important JavaScript and CSS inlined in the head that was required for page rendering. We're at the intersection here between slowing the page down and Google being able to render it. Is there a change to the current advice?
I would definitely say that if your JavaScript is critical to rendering the page, definitely not put it in the head anymore, because that is definitely gonna block you. Use dynamic rendering instead as a workaround, or even better, use server-side rendering, because that's improving, or hybrid rendering if it has to be, because that's improving the user experience as well. Because generally speaking, if it's like super small, tiny JavaScript in the head, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But then it's not critical for the rendering of the page if it's small and trivial. So everything that is large enough to be critical for rendering the page is also going to be horrifically bad for users on mobile, generally speaking, because it has to be downloaded first. And what's even worse on mobile, especially on reference phones, which are not phones that we are using probably, it's like the sub $100 phones. What makes JavaScript particularly expensive is it has to be parsed, it has to be compiled, and then it has to be executed. That's a lot of strain on the CPUs, and these mobile CPUs are not very good at it. So if you do that, and if it's a non-trivial amount, and when I say non-trivial amount, it's basically everything above 10 kilobytes, I would say, which is reasonable for something that is render blocking. Then it's gonna put a lot of strain and stress on the CPU and block rendering for a long time. So it hurts your users. Again, JavaScript not being a search issue, JavaScript being a usability or user experience issue here. So I would say try to get as much content as possible without JavaScript to your users as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, things like HTTP2 would not solve that if it's inline as well.
It doesn't solve it even if it's not inline, because we still have the parse, compile, execute steps, and those are the expensive ones. The transfer is so like 100. If you have 100 kilobytes of images and 100 kilobytes of JavaScript, they are not the same. They're not equal. The JavaScript is a bigger problem than the image, because for the image, exactly, the image can be basically as it comes in, it can be streamed by specific specialized hardware, which even most phones have on their systems.
Which is separate.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's easy, but the JavaScript, that's gonna be rough, hard on this, especially on older mobile CPUs. That might change with new CPUs coming to mobile, but unless they magically penetrate the market in the next year, this guidance is going to stay the same for a few years, I guess.
Cool.
So,
I forgot.
And this is somewhat related, and maybe tertiary or entry level. But what's the best practice for third-party scripts that you have to load on a page? For instance, you're a company that has badges or tracking or things.
Yeah.
What's the best practice for you guys for crawlability? Because those are the things that drive us webmasters nightmares in our page speed scores, right?
Yeah. I was about to say, like, it's good that you specify that you have to load, because my answer would have been don't load them.
Well, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But for third-party scripts, so I think we are pretty good at not fetching those, especially if it's like something like Google A/B testing stuff or analytics or something. Then we just don't use them for rendering, because they're not useful for us in this case.
On that topic, can you have a word with the PageSpeed team and ask them to remove it from PageSpeed recommendations for that specifically? Because I'm sure that causes everyone in this room on our side quite a lot of work.
It's only tag manager and analytics. Stop penalizing me. Yeah, no. But yeah, with third party, a lot of them do require, it does require for some rendering and whatnot. So what would be the best practice for to tuck those away?
I don't know if we have specific.
I mean, part of that is also what happens in the end with that. Like if they end up not rendering anything, then like worst case, we'll spend some time and try to parse the JavaScript, but it doesn't change anything.
Can we add them in robots? Like if we have a known list of things.
That's what he was referring to earlier.
If it's not on your site, then
you
can't.
I think the answer there was with regards to the rendering of the content, though, wasn't it? Is your question more around what we do with this, because we're being told to remove them for page speed reasons, but we have no ability to do so. Right. So the question is more of a page speed one than a rendering one, if I'm correct.
Yeah, but that's something. Like people come to us all the time with this and like, oh, come on, like it's a Google script, you should just like whitelist it. It's like, don't tell people that it's bad. But from like a more philosophical point of view, if it's slowing a page down, we should flag it, regardless if it comes from Search Console or.
It's also just a technical limitation. It's really hard to say which script does actually affect rendering and which does not, and not in the sense of for us in search rendering, that's completely whatever. But for page speed, it is unclear which script contributes what to the page, and there's no easy way of figuring that one out unless you would go and like basically toggle off each of them and do a visual diff, which is ridiculously and prohibitively expensive. So it's a philosophical issue of trying to break down something as complex as page speed into a number or a score. So I would say, like, if that's the only thing that drags your score down, you are probably fine. Because I would take a bet that in 90% of the cases, this is not the only thing that drags your page speed down.
Yeah, I think it's also a matter of interpreting the results.
Yeah.
Like you have to take these tools, but you have to know what they're actually showing. And if you just take that number and you say, oh, I need to tweak this number, then it's like you will end up with an empty page because that's like a perfect speed score, but
Mhm.
it doesn't help you.
Yeah.
You have to figure out like what the right balance is between making changes that work for your site, for your users, and making changes just for a tool that ultimately users are not going to look at the page speed score and say, oh, this is a good site, I'm going to buy something from it because it's page speed 95. They have other metrics.
But what we're looking at is how fast people start seeing something, a logo,
Yeah.
head,
A good example would be a
header,
font.
some
Yeah.
content. So we're
Um,
focusing on this,
fonts.
not overall page load
Yeah.
speed.
Yeah.
Is this the right strategy?
That's
That's
right.
There's no offense to Adobe, but your font scripts, man, they're killing me. They're killing me. When my client's like, we have to use this font. Why?
Can we kill recording for a sec? That's what we've been discussing for weeks. Like, pages 3.2 megabyte and 1.1 of it is fonts.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
no, they're
All
all
right.
important.
Let me just take a quick
I love
break
Adobe.
to let Martin Aldrich go, if you're okay. Is that
So-
good? Thank you for joining. Thanks for all
Is
of
there a
the.
follow-up question?
Like a
before
quick one.
Okay.
So, for example, if we convert a bunch of HTML links into a drop-down menu with a selector and go to like this list of states, instead of listing all 50 on the page, we have a select requirements in your state, go to see your requirements button. Would it break anything SEO-wise? Would you still be able to parse those links as normal links to the deeper pages of the site? Would it hurt
Yes.
rankings of deeper
I
pages?
guess the short answer to that is if it should be a link and is no longer a link, then that's not good. But
So I was afraid of.
I mean, especially the drop-down stuff, we try to figure that out, but there's like one hack you can do is in your JavaScript, you have the full URL. And if we look at the JavaScript code and we see a full URL, we'll go, this is probably a URL that's supposed to be linked. And we'll try to follow that. It's still not the same as a normal HTML link
So if
because
it's-
we can't
yeah.
really crawl it, but we can discover those URLs and pick them up.
also, if it's so this is not a ranking issue. This is a discoverability issue. So
Yes.
if you have a finite state set, like in the sense of
Yeah.
like select your US state for seeing something
Yes.
further on,
Mhm.
put them in the sitemaps, like have a
Well,
URL.
sitemaps will have them for
Yeah,
sure,
exactly.
but otherwise they wouldn't be linked within the site architecture.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a reason to do it in JavaScript specifically as opposed
It's
to
a kind of UX
CSS,
point of
HTML?
view that listing 50 links with names
Oh,
of the
But you
states.
can do that with CSS.
I was about
probably.
to say, if we pull out the UX card, then do not use a dropdown and do not use JavaScript. Use CSS to make it look different. That's totally possible. So like a good developer can fix that.
But the
without
use case
JavaScript.
for using, correct me if I'm wrong, the use case for using JavaScript here must be to select to display the local links to where you are, right? That's like, these are your local cities and it's pulling in geo coordinates and then
Local
displaying them using
states,
JavaScript.
but yeah.
But that, I mean,
Yeah.
that's, so where, depending on where you're crawling from, you're going to see different content if that is executed correctly.
No, that's
No, it's just a plain.
I think that's like the next level.
I think
Yeah.
they're just sounds
The
like they're
question
just
is how
trying to
you
use a
display
scripted mega menu, really.
Yeah,
I would just do it
ignore
through straight
dynamic
CSS.
input.
Yeah.
And the CSS would
No,
be.
I mean, even
Well, I
animation
just
and
want to
stuff
see
is
an example.
even like a lot of people prefer the JavaScript because the animation effects or things like that for that menu. You can achieve all that through CSS.
It would look like a drop down the same way.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
basically,
Yeah.
the advice here is to implement it via CSS and not
Yeah. CSS, HTML, like you said. Yeah.
Because then the content is all there
and
right
the
away.
and the links would have title attributes as well. In
If
that
you want,
Yeah,
sure.
If you want, yeah,
Just
it's
like you would
just
any link.
HTML. You would basically not change the HTML. You would just change the presentation. That's the beauty of the web, that you have HTML, which is the content, CSS, which is the presentation, and then JavaScript, which is magic and unicorns. Do not refer to magic and unicorns until you really have to.
Mhm.
Like, because with magic and unicorns comes a lot of radionuclear active waste, and you don't want to touch that stuff.
And they're
Oh my
likely
God.
doing what you guys are
It's-
recommending because I
comes at a
haven't seen it
price.
yet. I told them
Magic
make
comes
it
at a price.
crawlable and so that Google can find the links. It's just I
If
need
it's
to
in the
confirm
HTML,
they're
you'll
doing
find
the
it, and if it's proper links, so it has to be H tags, A tags, sorry, A tags with an href.
AHREF,
Like make
yeah.
it proper links. Do not
Tags.
like a bunch of developers then fall for tools that use spans or divs and on-click handlers. Bad idea.
That's good. On click, bad for links. Write that down.
Well, careful there.
You quoted it. It's on YouTube later. I'm gonna record that.
A tags and hrefs. Yeah. Those are the important bits.
So the net of all that is the advice from the JavaScript rendering guru at Webmaster Trends is just not to use JavaScript.
Use JavaScript where it makes sense. And if there is a solution in CSS or HTML, use that.
I'm just being purposefully.
Yeah. You're just like segueing me into saying the right things. That's wonderful.
Do you,
Can I get budget for an assistant?
Do you know anything about Google Images? Are these JavaScript things?
Oh, that time of the day already.
Yeah, I think we have to let Martin and Aldrich go first.
Images, I don't know that much about it. I think I haven't touched that.
They
that
kind
much,
of
but
like
So-
some scripts, right?
So within Google Images, or
Yeah, Google Images. I was wondering how Google interprets the data in Google Images that is used to build.
I don't think we crawl Google Images.
Okay,
No,
that's what I.
but I mean, Google Images is based on images that we've crawled from web
yeah,
pages.
so it would be weird to
Just
No,
display
no, no.
ourselves.
Google Images is the way to build images, like charts. Give Google Charts. Sorry, not
Oh,
Google.
Google
Charts. Google Charts. I meant.
Google
I mean,
Charts.
Google Charts.
Oh no, we don't pull out data from like graphs and charts and things like that. So sometimes we can recognize text and images.
So
but-
just ways to provide commentary, like
Yeah.
captions and
Yeah.
explanations of what you are seeing actually on the
Exactly. So if you have like a world map and you have different locations and it's like there's 55 here and 25 here, then we're not going to know that this number refers to that location.
Right.
You're
And the way the script looks, it doesn't make
Yeah.
me like understand which
Exactly.
number belongs to which country or yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. All
Okay,
right.
Thanks.
I think we'll finally let you
Thank
go.
you so much.
Thanks,
Martin.
Martin. Thank you for letting me meet you guys. I appreciate it.
Has been a pleasure. Not a problem.
So you'll see more of Martin at Chrome Dev Summit if any of you all go.
Oh,
Oh god,
you
yeah.
mentioned that, and that's for further news. But when is Chrome Dev Summit?
12th and 13th of November, I think. That's not my bag. Where did I
was
leave my
mine.
bag? Where did I leave my bag?
Leave Google Secrets.
Oh, I was over there. No, the thing is, like, it has my laptop in it, and that's like basically
Swap. I'll swap.
sure. You will also swap fingerprints then.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Yes.
Enjoy.
All right. Cool.
Online questions.
So we have a bunch of more questions that were submitted, which we'll never get through. But maybe we can get some from you all who joined here as well, and then we'll do some more questions from here from the room as well. What's on your mind?
Okay. Do you guys hear an echo when I talk?
No, you're okay over here.
It's okay.
I suspect.
Okay, I'll speak now. Hopefully everyone can hear me. But my main questions for today, it's sort of two-part, and it pertains to content cleanup on a large scale. So first is the concept of having multiple pages of information around a specific kind of topic, using pagination, things like that. Part of the cleanup and consolidation effort would be the desire to eliminate everything beyond page 1. So if a user lands on page 2, 3, 4, and so on, they would essentially be directed back to page 1 because page 1 has been deemed to contain the most quality and relevant content surrounding this subject matter. So the question is, on the fence whether, for the sake of what Googlebot needs, would it be better to do a 301 redirect from pages 2 on back to page 1, or would it be better to do a 410 gone sort of signal to indicate to Googlebot that everything from beyond page 1 is no longer being served there?
All right. Okay. I found the mute button. So I guess, first of all, that kind of means that everything on page 2 and following is something you don't want to have indexed anymore. Is that correct?
largely for the user, there would be a read more button, which would load on React specs, if that makes sense.
Okay, so in a case like that, I would probably go more for 301 redirects to really consolidate everything into the version that you actually do want to have indexed. You could also use 404s or 410s, but what would happen there is we would drop all of the signals from those pages and essentially lose them completely. I think the difficulty is if you still want to have the different pages indexed or available within the website, then obviously switching this around would mean you'd have to use separate URLs for those new URLs so that we can redirect the other ones. And then you're in the situation again that you have separate URLs for page 2 and page 3, and we would try to crawl and index those separately as well. So you're kind of like running into the same problem again.
Would you not be better off canonicalizing 2, 3, and 4 back to 1?
You can also do that. The tricky part there is that we don't always follow the canonical blindly, because we don't know, like, is this really the same page? Is this really something that we should fold together or not? So having more signals to tell us this is something that can be folded together, that helps us a lot. So things like internal links, if they point to page 1 in this list, sitemaps, if you just have page 1 in the sitemap file, all of that helps us to understand this is really the URL. But it can still happen that we would find page 2 or page 3 and try to crawl and index that.
As a follow-on to the gentleman's question, if you just had those read more links, rel next, and rel paginated as well, wouldn't that also?
That also helps us, but then it's still the case that we would try to crawl and index through those things.
How long? Go ahead. Sorry.
I think another thing that also comes into play here often is what kind of content you have on those pages. If it's actual separate content and it's nowhere else on your website, then you really need to make sure that it's somehow indexable and crawlable. On the other hand, if these are all pieces of content that are already on the rest of the website, then like just block them however you want to have them blocked, and that's fine. You're not going to miss out by blocking them.
Just on that note, how long do you guys keep, maybe you can answer this, the topical signals for URL that has been redirected? I've noticed a year later, Google pointing signals towards a page that really was not related to the old 301 redirect, but it was still showing up for a certain topic that it shouldn't have been from the old one. How long does that? A good example would be redirecting an old company with an old name to a new one.
A brand.
I've seen sites show up for that old company's name with no content at all a year later after redirect has been made. How long do you guys keep that? And then what's your recommendation on cleaning that up?
Yeah, so I guess the question for us kind of comes down to, are we indexing these separately? Mm-hmm. Or are we just thinking that it's an alternate URL for this piece of content? Mm-hmm. If we're indexing them separately, then that's something where like we haven't seen the redirect, or we're not processing it properly. Like, it's probably more of a technical thing. Mm-hmm. But most of the time, what happens is just like, we know this URL, like if you search for this URL, that page was really relevant. So we'll try to do you a favor and show that to you. Mm-hmm. So that's really common if you change domain names. You can do a site query for your old domain, and it'll still have content showing up like years later. Yeah. And it's not that we're indexing it with that URL. It's just like, we know, like, people who do the site query, they want to have these results, so we'll show them to you. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like our algorithms being more helpful than they probably should be if you're an SEO trying to diagnose if something is actually indexed.
So would that say, I'm just, for every URL, you have some kind of data that says it's about these topics, and you store that indefinitely or forever long?
I don't know indefinitely, but we keep that for a while.
Okay.
And I think one way you can double check to see what's happening there is if you use the new inspect URL tool in Search Console, and you enter the old URL, then it should say it's not indexed and that there's a canonical there, which is kind of confusing because it says it's not indexed, but if you do a site query, it'll show up. Right. But that's just because, like, we think, like, you're explicitly looking for it, so we'll show it to you.
What's interesting that even on some sites that's been gone for like 4 or 5 years and redirected, it's a 3-1 redirect, it's still showing up in search results.
Yeah.
It shows the destination
I
URL,
see.
so the
but
redirect.
that's like if you
There's other-
explicitly search for it, like we'll show
Even
it.
like for like a company name that's been rebranded or maybe bought out or something, I've even seen that show up years after the fact, pointing to the new company, even though I've never mentioned it on the site.
I mean, that's something also where I think a lot of sites have trouble with like rebranding or with obsolete products type of thing, where if you remove every mention of that, then obviously we're going to try to dig deeper to find mentioned content. And that's something that we have on our side as well. Like people search for webmaster tools, and it's like if we don't have webmaster tools on the landing page, like something weird might end up ranking. And
I'll keep that in mind when I create my new pages.
yeah, just make sure that you have something that can rank for those queries.
This might be a complete red herring, but if domain A in that redirect chain had tons of anchor text links pointing at it that were the search terms, would the relevance of that anchor text then be passed and stored for the new domain? And there's an extension. If you remove the redirect, then it should theoretically stop ranking for those terms.
I don't know about the remove the redirect part. That probably depends on the individual situation. But for us, we keep the links between canonicals. So if like some external page has a link to some page that's redirecting and the canonical is the final URL, then we make that link between those two canonicals. And that's where things like anchor text end up going. So that's probably where that happens. But if you remove the redirect and there are other reasons for us to suspect that these two pages are the same and we should pick a canonical between them, then probably we'll still keep them forwarded. Yeah, OK. Let me grab one from the people that submitted something. We have an English US-based site that also serves 6 other languages. We've been working with Treflan. Let's see. We have a Spanish version and a Portuguese version. Oh, and I guess the question is if they should be translating the URLs as well instead of just the content. From our point of view, any of that works. So I don't see a reason why you would need to translate the URLs, but obviously for local speakers, it looks really weird if you're trying to look at Spanish content and you have English URLs. So I try to localize the URLs if that's possible, but I wouldn't see it as something that would break things from an SEO point of view.
Or maybe they should use breadcrumb schema markup and have the localization happening in the schema so that the URL shows with it.
That's another good idea. Yeah. But
Instead of
then still, if people copy and paste the URL and send it to someone else, then they wouldn't see that.
Use case for
but in the search results, yeah, that's a good point.
Would there be any benefit to a local-based like TLD, like a .es for Spain or versus the .com being the totality of it?
That goes more into the question of geo-targeting versus hreflang. So with geo-targeting, we would, if we recognize that there's a geo-targeted version of that page, then we would rank that a little bit higher for queries that are kind of local information seeking. And with hreflang, we wouldn't change the ranking. We would just swap out the URLs. So if you really have something local and you know people are searching for it locally, then geo-targeting is the way to go. And you can do that with a TLD, or you can use .com with a folder or with a subdomain setup. That's something where people use different things for different reasons.
Yeah.
The only thing you can't do with geo-targeting is if you have the country setting in like a parameter in the URL somewhere.
Like the query string, I've seen that being.
Yeah, it's like country equals whatever, then we wouldn't be able to pick that up.
But in terms of URL structure, we have various sections of the site using either like /UK and then it's going to be K, or it's going to be en/UK or en-UK. Is there SEO impact if we use like 2 folders for language and country? Is this better to have one folder level? Because otherwise it's kind of, is this perceived as deeper down, the less relevancy or not really?
No, not from that point of view. But for geo-targeting, we need to have that part of the site verified separately in Search Console.
It is.
So if you have language and then country, that means you have to have all language versions and all country versions listed in Search Console, which is kind of messy.
Yeah, it is.
So if you have country first, that makes it a little bit easier.
Got it. Okay.
All right.
I can jump in.
Okay.
I had a question about domain splitting. So the idea that I have a client who went to a branded TLD, and so they went from 1 core domain to 5. And from my world, I was kind of concerned about the risks of mainly the process of something getting messed up. But we went through it about a year ago. And so it was a very like, we're up here, we died. And then eventually we came back and the trough was really long. And I was wondering if I found something where they had botched all their kind of deeper blog content and redirected it to the homepage of the corporate new domain instead of into the specific verticals that they had created. So we fixed that, and I think that helped. But I was wondering if you guys sense that when an entity goes from 1 to 5, that you still know it's the entity and that you're kind of giving it some weight beyond just the domain TLDs. Because I feel like that's going to be more common as branded TLDs for bigger operators start to play with that.
So splitting and merging sites is always really tricky for us. Moving sites is generally a lot easier because we can pass all of the signals one-to-one. It's a lot easier for us to debug as well. If something goes wrong, someone can look at it and say, like, this is the old state, this is the new state, and we can compare that. But if you're splitting or merging sites, then there's no really clear and well-defined, like, new and old state. They're not really mapped one-to-one because you're taking one site and you're turning it into 5. And it's a completely different situation for each of those individual sites. Right. You can't take those 5 sites and add them up and like come up with with the same number as before.
Right.
So that's something that takes a lot longer to be processed, and mistakes, they tend to be like more visible, I'd say, because it's like we have to reprocess everything. And if there's a mistake in there, that's
slow it down.
Can be kind of
another side of the equation is the backlinks to it. I mean, where are those going to go now?
Exactly.
Right?
So I knew they were concentrated on 2 of the 5. So going into it, I'm like, these will probably be okay, but these other smaller little brothers that you now have are going to get left behind, and kind of expecting that you have a vertical that you're not strong with. So setting expectations. But I just felt like there were also factors maybe that come into it that beyond it, you see that there's a corporate entity that's hosting in a certain area, and like those factors help maybe smooth that out, so that the timing I just knew was going to be long. I just wasn't sure if that was like average or.
I don't think we'd have any system to kind of understand like this entity has moved from this domain to this one of these 5 domains. I think it's really something we kind of have to figure that out almost on a per page basis. To see like this page has moved to this domain and is now the context of this page has changed completely. We have to kind of recalculate the whole setup.
Reverse canonical tag, right?
Yeah, I don't know, but then you're just deferring that decision.
What about like just spitballing like a same as schema markup or something like that? Would that?
I don't think we pick that. I mean, we might pick that up for different kinds of structured data, but not like for general site moves, migrations like that. Yeah. I mean, you have the same situation if you take multiple sites and you merge them into one site. That's
exactly what we might
like you always run into that as well. You have like 5 sites, and it's like, what is the final state? You can't say like add them all up and that's the traffic you'll get. It's essentially impossible to guess ahead of time and how long it takes.
In that specific example, though, of having multiple sites, let's say same products, currently competing in the same space, this is a hypothetical. There is a new domain which those two brands are going to merge into. Any specific considerations outside of the typical site migration checklist that you would do, apart from the fact that there's two going into one?
Nothing that really comes to mind. Yeah. I think it's just important to also make sure that you, from a content point of view, you also make sure that you have something that matches the old content, so that people who are explicitly looking for their old stuff, they will have some place to go.
From the non-existent metric of authority that you were questioning, but from that perspective, for example, a site ranks for a certain topic, certain subject matter. You have a site ranking on position 5 and another one ranking on position 6, and they kind of have good authority, page 1. If you merge them and they have some signals that merge into a single piece of content on the same topic, would it move up in rankings potentially?
Probably, yeah. I think that's generally something that we see. If you take 2 or 3 or 4 kind of weaker pages and you merge them into one,
even within the same site,
or externally, then that's something where we can say this is a stronger page. We can see that like more parts of the site are referring to this one single piece of content, so probably it's more relevant than those individual small pieces that you had before.
Now, I have seen, and you're the expert obviously, but I've seen where you've got 2 that you merge and they kind of have different topics. So there might be one topic that they're stronger with others, and then I've seen them become weaker across the board on all because you're basically competing for more.
No, that's
more
if you're
topics on the site
broadening
too.
kind of the
Yeah.
reach,
I've seen that happen with a lot of merges too, though, where one might have been up here on one topic, one here, and they both end up here on, or the new one ends up here.
I think if you have really different pieces of content or different topics, then that can happen, because it's basically you're taking 2 completely separate pages, you're putting them on the same page, and then our algorithms have to think about, like, so what's the primary topic of this page? Right. It's like, it might be this, it might be that, it might be some weird mix that we figure out.
But but to your point, I've done things when I've just seen prior webmasters and content writers created multiple pieces on the same topic with a slightly different lens. When you merge a few, 2 or 3 or 4 sometimes into one single good piece explaining in depth, it ranks well.
Yeah. I think that's something I generally try to recommend to people. And it's like, if you can have fewer URLs, and usually that makes it easier, like from a management point of view, but it also helps from an SEO point of view, where we can really say, well, this is stronger content. This is something that's referred to from a lot more places than these individual other pieces that you had before.
Hey, John, if I can ask a question that I think plays into that exact conversation. Sorry, I'm doing I hear an echo, so I'm just going to do this. Is it, so on the, if you mute maybe, there, yeah, that's good. On the topic of creating, having one single authoritative page versus multiple iterative pages, what about for product content, expired product content that might still be relevant? So from in the automotive space, model year car, so a 2018, 2017, 2016 model year Toyota, let's say. Is it beneficial to have all of those pages in sort of like an archive section, or to maybe have one, truly authoritative Toyota Corolla page that maybe contains all of the archived content within it, perhaps in like folded accordions at the bottom, whereas the top main body content contains your current model year content, perhaps?
Good question. Yeah, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that. So what I would do is try to test that from a usability point of view to see what works for the users, what doesn't work. I could imagine there are situations where you have one page that lists like the older versions as well. There's definitely the option of moving the older content into an archive section to kind of de-emphasize it a little bit. I think that's also an idea. It could also be that you have a mix where you say, well, this is the recent version, and on the archive page, I list all of the archive versions, which might be another approach to take there. But I think it really also depends on how users engage with that content and how they search for it. If you're explicitly searching for a specific year for a piece of hardware, then if you land on a page with a current product, you might go, well, this is not what I was looking for. I'll search somewhere else. So that's something where you probably need to think about what users are actually expecting from a page like that.
So on that note, not to beat this subject down too hard, but how do you contend with that when you're speaking about a homepage versus an interior page competing with itself? So you've got a topic that your homepage is your site where all the external signals are saying it's about because that's how they naturally happen, versus we want this page to be the authoritative. How do I tell that on a homepage to know this is the topic when they normally might compete with themselves?
One thing you can do there is really be totally obvious with your site structure to make it really clear that these are actually really important pages.
Right.
That's something that usually we pick up on that, but it can still be kind of tricky where if on your homepage you're listing the same product as well and you have a link to the product page and essentially the same information in both places, then it's sometimes really hard for us to figure out, like, should we send people to the product page because maybe they can convert better on the product page, or are they looking for the homepage where they can find different products? So that's really tricky, especially if the content is the same on all of these. If it's a matter of the homepage being about the company and it links to the product in the sidebar saying, like, this is our most popular product, and throughout the whole site you're linking to the product and saying this is our most popular product, then probably we would pick the product page for those product type queries. But it's sometimes tricky. So we have people that complain to us about all variations of this, like the product page, a category page, a home page.
Right.
It's like, why are you showing our home page when you should be showing the product page or the category instead of the home page? And it's like everyone wants something different, and for our systems to figure that out is really tricky. And essentially the only really obvious way you can give us this information is to say, well, this is no index and this is index. But that's kind of harsh.
Not reasonable for that.
The nuclear option.
Or some webmasters
Keyword
accidentally
stack,
de-index their
how about
homepage now after this call.
Should rank 4.
Let's go back to that.
It's interesting to say that because I've seen that exact example there in both ways. So a very large site, millions of indexed URLs, huge amounts of backlinks, ranks extremely competitively once you add model year onto any model. Much smaller site. I've also worked on motorcycles, not cars, not the same history, nowhere near as many pages, couldn't get anything like those pages to rank until they accumulated them all together. And then they started ranking for the model names. So I've seen literally that exact circumstance I've seen it play out both ways.
Cool.
Okay.
Cool. That's
environment, or it was accordion.
I had a light question.
It was accordion, or it was
of
No,
the
it was
sites
split,
that
it was
are
flat.
indexed. Do you guys know? I mean, I'm assuming you have the data. Like, what percentage actually have Google Search Console verified? Is it the majority? Is it some? Is it a tiny, like? Because
there are a lot.
in my world, the number of times I engage with a company that's fairly large and has a lot of digital marketers, they don't have it. And I'm like, how? Yeah, and it's happened too frequently for it. I don't think it's an anomaly.
I asked the same question for Bing Webmaster Tools.
That one I'm not worried about. I'm just curious because I think it's interesting data.
We do have data on that, but one of the things we look at is more of the search results, not like index sites, because like there are gazillions of domain names that are indexed and nobody cares about them. And it's like,
so it's
who cares if they're verified or not?
Yeah.
But if they're actually showing up in search results and they're actually, like we assume they're probably maintained somehow and people care about them, then that's kind of the people that we would like to see have access to Search Console. One of the things we started doing now is being more proactive about the analytics verification, where you can use Google Analytics to verify a site as well. But we see a lot of sites just use analytics and not have Search Console set up. So we've started setting it up so that if you have analytics set up, we'll automatically add Search Console as well. Just because it's theoretically already there, you just didn't like click the right buttons to make it show up.
So that's an actual thing then.
That's happening. Yeah, I mean
I
that's
missed that
been
one,
happening over time, and
I've seen it in tech
that's
match.
confused some people as well. Where it's like, why suddenly they have Search Console access when you just had analytics access? But
sometimes people still maintain access to analytics after they've completed their consulting work, and they get notified that they can get access to their webmaster tools, and then that's a matter of maintaining access.
That's for maintaining.
I think that's always kind of tricky.
I just got a client the other day. I cleaned out like 20 people for back. I was like, what are you doing?
First thing I do is look at
all your competitors probably have your data. What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, people assume that they're not going to be looking at it afterwards, but like, who really knows? And I think it's kind of tricky with Search Console data in general because you also have the removal tools there as well. So if like ex-employees have access to a Search Console account, then that's probably not that great.
I've seen previous contractors delist sites. But yeah.
Okay.
Can I give you two quick Search Console data questions? They're super
okay.
quick. First one, I noticed that the external backlink section appears to have been much improved over the last couple of months. Congratulations on that. Are we ever going to get an API for that data?
I don't know. Maybe.
That'd be really cool.
I mean, I have nothing to like pre-announce. Like
the
maybe is not like I know it's happening, but is more that we've talked about this and kind of expanding the API in Search Console in general. And maybe this is something we could add.
Did you remove the ability to download the links? Because
I don't think so.
I'm missing it when I'm looking at it.
So the complete set of external links. The reason that I ask is, having looked recently, so in old history, all of the other indexes swept up everything that was in Webmaster Tools and Search Console. I found quite a lot of stuff on various sites that is not on any of the other indexes recently. That may be because sites are more often proactively blocking everyone else from crawling them, or it could just be that the Google data has got better. Either way, I'd like at it. That's the So that'll be released sometime early 2019, and that was the.
I don't know. I don't know.
That was the first question. The second question was there was an August 19th update. This was referred on to me by Dejan Petrovic. The August 19th update where it changes the graphs when you have when you filter the graphs in the performance report in Search Console as of August 19th. It significantly reduces the amount of traffic that appears in the graph once you've started putting keywords into it, whereas it never used to.
Yeah.
Is that a bug? Is it going to change back? Why does it do that?
That's probably not going to change back.
Fair enough.
So the kind of the background there is that we filter queries before they reach Search Console, Search Analytics. If it's really rare, kind of for privacy reasons, and that's done before it hits Search Console. And in the past, what we would do there is we would just, I think, include them all in those graphs for those queries, where essentially the data is kind of skewed in a positive way. And now we remove all of these filtered queries from those keyword URL queries, which skews them in a negative way, because like we don't know if people were searching for those, and now we're just saying, well, if we don't know, we're not going to show them. In the past, we're like, well, if we don't know, we're just going to assume that maybe they were. So that change, I don't see that going away, because it's also due to the way that we store this data internally in the Search Console side.
I'm assuming you would get that equivalent data from your broad match keyword report in AdWords, though, if you were spending money on clicks.
I have no idea.
Fair enough.
No idea what that report would show.
No, that's the privacy reasoning for it would seem to be undone by that, but it's a separate.
I don't know. I don't know how AdWords does that. Yeah. All right, I think we're kind of out of time. So if any of you out there want to ask one last question, then we can go through that. And otherwise, I'll stop the broadcast and we can chat some more as well.
I'll go ahead. Doing any other ones?
All right. Let me find the mute button.
Yeah, there we go. So last chat we had, John, I asked you about dynamically inserting a Treflan and canonical markup using JavaScript. So generally, I've done that. It seems to be okay. My concern, or what I'm seeing now, is in Search Console, it's still saying no. When I go to the language targeting section, it's saying no hreflang markup is on your page. Is that, am I going to be able to resolve that if I'm going to continue to use JavaScript to implement? Okay, so how? You're still muted.
He hasn't executed his JavaScript to speak yet. So.
Yeah. So if it's implemented properly and we can pick that up, then that will start showing up in Search Console. I know they've had some kind of data latency problems recently. So if you've made those changes in the last few weeks, maybe it's just not updated yet.
It's been about a week, yeah.
Yeah. Well, if it's been about a week, I would definitely assume it's just a matter of time. That's something where, I mean, from a rendering point of view, first we have to render and reprocess the rendered version for indexing. And then Search Console has to pick that up and kind of process everything through their pipelines, which takes a couple days as well in the normal case. And I think at the moment they're still a little bit slower than normal. So that should start happening.
Awesome.
Cool.
One last thing.
OK, hold on.
Thank you. OK, so I'm sure this is considered SEO 101. It's kind of just a general high-level question. But for websites with large amount of content pages, we're talking tens of thousands or more, the idea of pruning content or taking down pages with content deemed of a lesser quality, in your opinion, does that tend to improve the overall, I guess, quality score of a website and possibly lead to other existing content receiving more visibility in search as a result?
Okay. It should. It should. I mean, especially if this is content that you don't want to have indexed because it's low quality, then removing that does help us to understand the rest of the site better. And it's something that I suspect is not just theoretical. Like I've seen various presentations at conferences where people are saying, I removed, I don't know, 1/3 of my site, and the rest of my site is ranking a lot better because of that. So that's something that's certainly an option. In talking with the indexing and ranking teams, usually they say we shouldn't be telling people to just remove low-quality content, but rather to improve it. From a practical point of view, of course, like depending on the site, the kind of content you have, sometimes you can improve it. Sometimes it's just low-quality cruft that you've collected over the years that doesn't really make sense to improve on a kind of point-by-point basis.
So we're doing this exercise on thin content. So we have a tutorial site which has a lot of quality content, and what we're doing is a lot of it is not performing. So what we're doing is we're looking at what kind of topics it's ranking for. So if it's a good quality topic that has a lot of search demand, then we go and we collect all the pages, and it could be like tens of thousands. Then we go and put them in Screen Frog and run word count, and anything less than like 300 words, it's a thin content. So we go back then and look at the pages, and at this point, it's going to be probably a couple hundred pages. So, and then you look at what's there, and usually you find it's going to be a video header and like a sentence. So then you go to authors, and then you do transcript of video and go to the authors and like, can you write better content? And then it's immediately getting feedback. So, again results because Google finds okay, that's
First,
interesting, especially if you had like how-tos for videos for tutorials. It's important, so you can actually repurpose content that's not performing. It's like sitting there, nobody cares about it, and kind of gets a new life to it.
I think you have to be careful with the metrics and not just assume that like 300 words is a magical count. But like if it's your site, like you have to find some metrics to say like I can't look at a million pages.
We just looked at the sample and found that it was like 275 or whatever it was. It was a good one. No, it included actually navigational words as well. So
I mean that's something where like if you look at your site in a bigger picture, like you can find these different metrics. Like some people use things like bounce rate or time on site, all of that.
And it wasn't ranking, so it was actually quality keywords, but it was ranking like page 2 or lower in Google. So it was kind of like non-performing, but
And when you remove content, generally, if there is, of course, matching good content, you redirect it to that new matching content. But if it's kind of related, maybe not. Do you want to point redirect still? Do you want to point to homepage?
I think 404s are fine. So redirecting to the homepage is something for a lot of cases. We'll pick that up as a soft 404, and we'll treat it as a 404 anyway. So it's like if you think this is the best approach for the removed content, fine. But a 404, a good 404 page is also fine.
Do you have a mass number of 404s hit at the same time? Is that going to send some other signal?
No.
Where you guys go? Ooh.
No.
So
404. Yeah, go ahead.
If the content doesn't have like links to them, or if the content does have links, then would it be worthwhile saving it and redirecting?
I mean, it all depends on the volume. Like if you can look at it individually and you're like saying, oh, this one matches this, and I can redirect it, then that's fine. But if you have tens of thousands of pages, you're not going to have time to figure out like what would this page match to. Like maybe you can automate some of that, but for the most part, you kind of have to take a hard cut and just say, nobody's visiting these pages. They're not ranking. There's like zero value for my site to keep these. So I will just like cut them all out. All right. So with that, let's cut off the recording. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for watching. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Great to have people here in person. And hopefully we'll see more of you all in some of the future Hangouts, or at least more questions.
Or you midnight or early mornings if you have. It's from Switzerland.
I'm just going to put a picture of me on that.
If you could start having them at midnight your time, that'd be ideal for us.